Welcome back to r/NeighborsFromH, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors, and if you are new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community, and without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled Revenge on Home Buyers. Last year, Thanksgiving, a group of us were together and a 30-something couple were talking about how much they were screwing over the owner of their soon-to-be new house. They had negotiated back and forth for a low price and had asked for several contingencies, had nickel and dimed every last thing they could out of the inspection. At one point, the new owner had even threatened to walk away from the deal. They were pretty proud of their tactics and how great their realtor was. One of the over 55 people finally laughed and said, "You're not going to come out ahead like you think you are. There are consequences for your actions. Trust me, the seller always wins." She then told the story of her first house she and her husband saved and scraped for years before they were able to buy a 100-year-old fixed upper. This was in the 1990s and interest rates were higher. They bought during a seller's market, a major employer in their town closed/relocated, the town was plunged into a recession. No jobs, people moved away and housing prices dropped. 4 years later, she and her husband are getting a divorce. It is now a buyer's market, their house sits on the market for over a year. And finally, they get an offer. The buyer's realtor was related to them and was a shrew. The offer was less than what they paid for the house and they had made several costly upgrades. The buyer tried asking for several changes and cash back at closing. After they did the inspection, they kept demanding for things to be done. They started with all the lower cost things, new smoke detectors, snaking a drain, and every 2 to 3 days it was something else they wanted done. Finally, she and her husband had to tell her realtor they had no money left, they couldn't afford what the buyer was asking for, and they had no choice but to let the buyer out of the contract. The buyer backed off the repairs but then wanted a couple pieces of furniture that were family antiques. When that did not work, they wanted a lower price. She and her ex were about one step from a nervous breakdown and were convinced the buyers would walk. She told a few more stories about how the buyers and inspector were late an hour for the inspection, they brought their dogs in the house, she was very allergic, the dogs peed and pooped in an area that had a new carpet, etc. She lived in a state where buyers and sellers all meet around a table in a lawyer's office for closing at the same time. Roughly an hour before that meeting, the sellers and realtor do a final walkthrough. The night, well, early morning, while it was still dark, before closing, she dumped around 100 gallons/30 pounds of salt water on the grass and bushes. She turned down the temperature on the water heater, she replaced toilet paper rolls with almost empty ones. The next morning, she and a very good friend sat a half a block away and waited for them to finish the inspection. Once they left, the friend went into the house, she waited a few minutes and drove to the closing. The new owners were about 10 minutes early to the signing and she was about 5 minutes late. She was very slow about signing the papers and a couple of times asked to have things repeated. While she was signing things, her friend was removing a couple of boards in the attic and adding a mama house and her new litter to the attic. He also removed some lattice work and threw a termite's nest under the front porch. Then he sprayed some sugar water around the cold chute and exterior basement/cellar entrance. Even she knew turning down the temperature on the water heater was petty, but she also hoped that even the one cold shower would start their day off lousy. She moved out of the area, but a year later when she was visiting, the grass had not recovered. She noticed the attic windows had all been replaced and a couple of old huge trees were trimmed back. 3 years later, there was a new front porch. This was an old house with a wrap around the front porch, so not a cheap fix. She later heard the people who bought the house lost it through bankruptcy in less than 5 years. Fast forward to this year at Thanksgiving, we were smaller in numbers but the same couple was there. They were a bit deflated. While the previous owners didn't do anything quite as bad as the woman in her 50s, it was a pretty tight-knit neighborhood. All of the neighbors had heard blow by blow details of their negotiation tactics. They were very cool to them upon meeting, and even a year later they don't feel very welcome. The neighbors will gather in the street and visit, now with some distancing. Whenever they try to walk over and join the conversation, the group breaks up. They don't think it is fair that the neighborhood kids don't play with their kids. One of the more blunt neighbors told the husband, "Your child is welcome to play with my kids in my house, but I don't want my kids around you." They are considering moving again. They are not bad people, but it reminded me that buying a house may be a business transaction, but like the woman said, there's consequences for every action. And you know guys, speaking about old or not so old houses, recently a friend of mine in Thailand, actually a Thai person who is relatively well off, was thinking about buying a house in my city. However, the houses he was looking at were all around 3 to 5 years old. So not newly built, but in my opinion, 3 to 5 years old for a house is not really a lot. Or what do you think? Where I am from in Europe, people often buy houses that are 10 to 20 and maybe more years old. So I'm not really sure if a house being 2 to 3 to 5 years old is really a big deal, but I would appreciate your opinion on this in the comments. And the next one is titled, "They Took Our Parking Spot." Alright, the story begins a few years back. My mom and I made most of the important decisions for the house, which only included us and my brother at the time. And my brother cannot even do his schoolwork, so he got dragged along for the ride. At the time we were deciding where to move as our current place was expensive and bad, and I hated the school district. I voiced this to my mom and we immediately left that district for a lower rent place as my brother did not like the district any more than I did, and all was well. For like the first week, and then our neighbors showed up. Only one really needs a name, so I will refer to him as Roger. And Roger sucked. Our first interaction with him was him parking in our parking space, something that would become a frequent occurrence for him and his friends to do. This was a pretty big issue because the only other parking we could realistically use was 3 blocks away, so this definitely ruined my mom's day when it happened, and watching her mood get ruined by a dick of a neighbor was never lovely. This added up over time, so I decided to retaliate against them, first in a small way. At the time we were still thinking it would stop, so I did something small. I told my friend to park next to our spot and give our neighbors a taste of no parking. This did not end well. Roger parked his car in and immediately threatened him with physical violence. My friend told him he was not local and if he let him out he would be on his way. After I told my mom about this, she insisted that this was the last straw. Our landlord was not doing anything to preserve our parking and our neighbors were threatening us with physical violence. Well, what the hell are we gonna do? I asked my mom. We are gonna run the lease up, she replied, and called some friends. And called some friends we did, overtime, quickly just because they incited our wrath by taking our parking spot. We did anything and everything we could to ruin Roger's life. Anytime we saw him we would just smile and wave. He never knew we were behind any of this. My mom contacted one of her friends who was a sheriff. He mentioned he knew of drugs getting, allegedly, passed around in our neighborhood but did not know who was doing it. He told her if we got enough evidence they could stake out his house to grab more, and eventually that might lead to roping him in. Busting him with a drug dealer? That would be sweet. We would finally have the parking back. So we set out to collect any and every piece of evidence we could. Audio of him screaming? Recorded. We'd smell through the walls? Times and locations written down. People parking in our spots? License plates noted down. I set up a camera to automatically record them coming and going too. We had a thick book of a paper trail on when and what this guy did in his house. About 10 months into this my mom left me out of the loop, still not sure why, but as I understand it my logging of license plates immediately lined up and we found out Roger was the a-hole dealing drugs. Half of the license plates we had noted down had been arrested and searched and drugs were found. The cops were confident now they had their guy and just needed a bit more evidence on him. This all came to a climax after a leases-long suffering. We had never used our parking spot, had walked 5 minutes away just to get in our damn car, and had been threatened by and woken up by our neighbor repeatedly. And then, just 4 days before we were to move out, it happened. 6 law enforcement cars swarmed his perimeter, 4 of which were police cars, 2 of which were from Child Protective Services. I saw the door get kicked down, the guy get dragged out in handcuffs, along with his wife and 3 kids removed from the household and driven in the other direction. To this day, nobody except my mom's sheriff friend, who was very grateful, knew of her involvement, and according to him, the guy got quite a few years and won't see those kids again. And ripe stars, if you have watched until here and enjoy the stories about awful neighbors, please don't forget to like the video and post some star emojis in the comments to support my channel if you want. I would really appreciate this and it would make me very happy. Thank you so much in advance, and now let's move on to the next story. And the next one is titled, "You know what? Call the cops." I live in a completely unsoundproofed flat with my wife and kid. We sadly discovered it after moving in because the neighbors were not there when we visited. Crap happens. And by the way guys, that would be my biggest nightmare. Anyway, as every occupant was aware of it and we all had small kids, we agreed upon having 3 rules. Noise kept to a minimum between 1 PM and 4 PM on weekends. Same goes starting from 8 PM to 7 AM all days. Warn at least the day prior if you plan a party. Does not mean total silence at all, just not using power tools or blasting music or talking way above normal volume. It went quite okay for 2.5 years, but then the above us neighbors moved. They got replaced by a father in his mid-40s and his son about 25 years old. After welcoming them, we warned about the sound issue and the rules to help everyone have a quiet time. They said okay and thanks for the warning. A few days go by and the dad brings over his girlfriend, he is divorced, and they banged all night. Was making me laugh, but around 1 AM that lady started singing, so I went upstairs for a very awkward conversation. I just told the out-of-breath sir that again the building had no soundproofing and that singing at 1 AM was a bit too much after that long evening and we would really like to sleep now. He went red as possible and we exchanged few words, just saying nobody's mad, but that the sound issue is very real. After that it was okay, but as he realized how much that issue was real, he started going to his girlfriend's place on weekends and his son started bringing friends over more frequently. We learned he has not 1 but 3 sons, so 2 of them are not supposed to live with him regularly. Anyway, as they invited friends over, it was always in party mode, no respect at all for the rules. I went upstairs approximately 10 times in a few months because we were fed up about being obliged to sleep with earplugs and having our kidnaps ruined. I finally decided to talk about this to their father. He was not happy about his sons and told me he will talk to them, but also was a bit discouraged and tried to tell me, if necessary, call the cops. I was not willing to do so because I am more about peaceful solutions and told him that it won't help keep cool relations in the building. First lockdown came to my country, all neighbors decided to flee elsewhere, we had the building for ourselves. That was a great help for our nerves and sleep, we rediscovered what it was to live without noise. And now, the end of lockdown, few incidents but enough to make my wife and I so mad at those kids that we were not talking anymore but screaming at them. Then one of them told me, "You know what, call the cops." I didn't do it that time as they shut their noise afterwards. Second lockdown started about 2 weeks ago, no neighbors moved that time except for their dad. As soon as he left we heard more noises than average above us, but not enough to trigger us at first. The second day we realized there were at least 5 young adults in that flat and they started partying. Not loud music, but music anyway, talking loud to each other from both ends of the flat, clanging chairs, slamming doors until 1 or 2 AM each night. We hoped they will leave soon or at least calm down, but not at all and no sign of the dead. 10 days in, our cup was more than full. We went upstairs to again tell them to stop making so much noise and that it was the last warning. The day after that, the same story. I was furious. I screamed at them to shut their music right now, it was 11 p.m. and that their friends had to leave by tomorrow or I will make sure to call the cops.
Oh, just call the cops. Nobody's moving. We live together as co-renters.
Oh really? I called the cops, lockdown is in effect, you can be with family sure, but not with friends like that, and knowing the building's landlord, I was sure their situation was not official at all. The cops came, told them the brothers could stay but the friends had to go back to their place. They gave no fine for this time, but they had to make sure I would not have to call them again. They told me to not go see the neighbors if it happens again, but directly call them back. The next morning we also decided to call the landlord to explain the situation, no father in sight for 10+ days, at least 3 unknown persons living there with 2 family members. A lot of noise every day and nights, refusing to make any effort and claiming to be co-renters, the landlord was not happy, told me I was right to call the cops and to warn him about the rent situation. He told me he will call their father right away. Same day late afternoon, I started to hear some movements above, people running left and right. Just before dark I was pleased to see those 5 young adults with their luggage exiting the building and going toward the train station. The cherry on the cake, I saw one of them giving the finger behind him in the building's direction. I laughed so hard. Calm night with a smile on our faces. And guys, I'm wondering, have you ever had to deal with noisy, inconsiderate neighbors? And if so, how did you get rid of them, if you did at all? I gotta say guys, now doing this YouTube stuff for around 2 years, if I would live in a building that had super thin walls and I could hear the neighbors all the time, I would probably go crazy. And the last one is a little Neighbors from Hell bonus story from our own subreddit posted by user rcreel, and it is titled Unusual Encounter with Neighbor Not Seen for Work. So guys, if you are listening to this at work, maybe proceed with caution. I will try to keep this clean, but the subject matter may be a bit crass for some people. Background: I've been a gardener all my life. In recent years I've actually amassed a large collection of rare plants and can boast to have the largest collection of unique cultivars in the country for several species of plant. I also have a preference for useful plants that have multiple practical uses. As a result, I've met many people in the natural medicine practice. I have learned there are 2 types of herbalists. The first type researches the plant's chemistry and reads or conducts actual academic and pharmacological studies. Plants can be powerful medicines if used appropriately. The other type are the new age folk who do no real research and make up their own facts. Usually the 40-year-old suburban housewife type who sells essential oils on Facebook, or the extremely Caucasian Native Americans who resell dream catchers bought wholesale from China on their Etsy page. These groups are distinctly different and I try to avoid the latter. Several years ago, a woman reached out to me via a mutual acquaintance. She was an horticulturist and her husband a biochemist. They were looking to get a specific rare cultivar of elderberry bush. As it happens, anyone in the US who has this cultivar got it from me, as I was the original importer. So I was happy to help them out. Turns out they moved in just a couple miles down the road from me, so they were ecstatic to see my collection so close to their new home and have someone who could source a lot of these rare plants from them. We have been friends since, and I have helped them find plants for several of their projects. Unbeknownst to me, 2 years ago, the woman's mother had moved in with the young couple, and I would later find out she was a bit off. Alright, she's actually nuts. She is what becomes of helicopter parents when their children grow up and leave home. She had no identity of her own outside of her daughter's activities, and so she would throw herself into whatever her daughter was doing, trying to mimic her. On the surface, this is not such a bad thing for parents to adopt the hobbies of their children to better relate to them through shared interests. That is healthy, but this lady did not want to put in the work, the research and study her daughter and son-in-law had. She got all her info from social media. So last year I met the mother, there was a knock on my door, and this woman, who I would estimate to be in her mid-50s, was standing there asking to speak to the lady of the house. I assumed she was one of those mail order makeup sales reps, and they are not uncommon around here. I informed her I was the only one home, I'm a guy. She then went on with a sales pitch. What she was selling left me floored. She was peddling a do-it-yourself feminine hygiene product, a natural holistic labia whitening cream. Mind you, I am a man, I haven't need of such a product and frankly did not know such things even existed. But she carried on with the sales pitch, how she invented this miracle product and has used it herself for 2 weeks now. Oh good, so it has had extensive trials. One trial participant, who is also the inventor, used it for 2 whole weeks. She hands me a small 1-ounce sample bottle, but again, what was I supposed to do with it? Then she pulls from her purse a little trifold brochure hastily printed on a home printer and folded crookedly on cheap paper with a before and after picture on it. Yep, she handed me a picture of her vulva to illustrate the effectiveness of the whitening cream. The before and after pictures, which were the same identical photo, had the exposure on the after picture turned up, so her labia and indeed everything else in the photo appeared visibly lighter in the after shot. Now, she did not say it was her private parts I was looking at. For all I knew, she might have just downloaded a photo from the internet, but she was by her own admission the entirety of the trial group pretty sure it was hers. The brochure goes on to explain what natural ingredients are in the cream: peanut oil, lemon juice, saffron, and an egg white emulsification, with a proprietary mix of healing herbs, which I discern from the smell to be tarragon and thyme. She was basically selling small jars of homemade mayonnaise. I thanked her for the sample politely and said I would pass it on to the lady of the house, and she left, beaming with pride that her new enterprise seemed to be taking off. I rolled my eyes and went back to whatever I was doing. Crazy people and their crazy get-rich-quick schemes are common in my area, though this one was noteworthy. A couple of days later, I get a call from the young couple I had befriended. Hey, did a crazy lady come to your house? Well, there was one who wanted to sell me mayonnaise to whiten and tone my private parts, I said snarkily. I don't know how well it would work on her private parts, but it was fantastic on a turkey sandwich. Just a joke, I did not actually eat it. She apologized profusely. That is when I found out it was her mother. She had been reading beauty blogs and experimenting, picking her daughter and son-in-law's brains on various beauty products. They found the brochures and a list of addresses to follow up, questioned her, and found out about her little enterprise. They were going down the list and contacting everyone, fearing some liability if anyone used these products. Thankfully nobody did. Most people apparently shut the door in her face. The following day, she and her husband dropped off a plate of cookies to me to make amends. I invited them in and we sat down. I returned the brochure, which the daughter was horrified to see when I pulled it out. She knew about them, but seeing it had actually been distributed to people in her neighborhood who she knew, it really set in just how bad the situation was. Her mom had been leaving them in people's mailboxes too, apparently, and their phones were ringing off the hook with upset neighbors. They explained that she has a history of erratic behavior, not really mental illness, but she's always been socially inept. She was just feeling out of place living with her daughter and wanted to find something that was similar to her and her husband's interests, and she missed the mark by a mile. I assured them it is okay, I cannot speak for the neighbors, but I'm not so easily offended. I know mayonnaise when I see it and would not spread it on my private parts even if I had one. We had a couple of beers and got to talking. I suggested that maybe they should take an interest in one of her hobbies and kind of steer her in the right direction that way. They took it to heart, and today I got my first legitimate product from the mom. She, with the help of her kids, is now making soap. I am down for 2 bars a month for $5. Business license is pending, but they are pursuing it. Apparently, she has found some interested buyers around town, and I will be helping them source some plants in the spring to aid in her soap business. I have 200 sea buckthorn plants set aside for them. The couple is expecting their first kid in a few months, and the wacky grandma-to-be is putting all the profits of her business aside for the grandkids' college fund and enjoying herself much more with her little upstart cottage industry she can manage herself. So, a nice happy ending to an otherwise bizarre story. Another bonus anecdote: One of the people I provide plants to is an herbalist who told me a funny story along similar lines. She had a patient who was having dryness in her nether regions, for which she recommended a poultice of marshmallow be applied for an hour. This is an anti-inflammatory herb that moisturizes well. Her client, however, used marshmallows, the fluffy sugar candy one might roast over a campfire, not the herb. I am given to understand the results were less than ideal. This is why we have pharmacists, so somebody knowledgeable can put the medicine in your hand directly and patients don't interpret advice themselves. And I gotta say guys, overall this was a strangely wholesome story, but it is very much appreciated. Thank you so much for the interesting story. And by the way guys, you know, one curious thing I noticed right when I arrived in Thailand years ago, in the West we often have creams for sale that make your skin look tan. However, here in Thailand that is not really a thing. People use these whitening products in almost everything. You have deodorants that whiten your skin, skin creams, just everything. That was definitely a little culture shock of sorts. And guys, unfortunately we have already reached the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and if you haven't already, please also go to patreon.com/ripeyoutube, where I upload exclusive Reddit videos starting at just $3 a month. This is a great way to support me in case you are interested, and the chance for me to become independent from YouTube revenue. Thank you so much for watching, please don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.